What's up? Hello, everyone. Is my mic on? It was a lot louder at rehearsal yesterday. It's good to be here. Is everybody having a good time? Cool. So when Mac first reached out for me to talk at Dash, he kind of suggested that I talk about failure. And at first I was like, oh, cool, I'm the failure guy. But the more I thought about it, I kind of realized that I'm probably in a unique position to talk about failure because I've held a lot of different roles in the creative industry, from print designer, worked with motion and animation, and I've owned my own studio. And I didn't really follow a proven path. It was all out of order, and it kind of took me a long time. So yes, I'm going to talk about failure, but in particular, I'm talking about my failure to fear failing. This is like my personal experience, but I think it's pretty relevant to everybody, especially like in the creative field. But I just want this to be a reminder that like failing in motion design is not really like a failure. It's not the end of the world. So in 2019, I closed my studio that I'd been running for just over 10 years. And it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. It felt like failing at the time. But the more I thought about it, you know, what I learned, and a big part of what I'm going to talk about is that failure is subjective, right? What is or what isn't failure is subjective. And all these choices I've made in my life, I feel like have been kind of stepping stones to push me forward one way or another. So to start, I'm going to jump way back. As I began like thinking about failure in relation to my life and career, I started to realize like I always kind of just jumped into things without worrying too much about whether or not it was going to work out in the end. And when trying to like understand why that was, I was able to kind of pinpoint these two things that had a big impact on my life, and that's skateboarding and punk rock. And like I know that sounds kind of weird, but these two like subcultures have really like been a catalyst for myself and like so many other creative people. For some reason, it just sort of like breeds creativity. And when I'm talking about punk, it's not this. Sorry, guys. But it's more this. So like in the mid 80s, there was this wave of bands that kind of formed as a response to a scene that was becoming like increasingly violent and non-accepting of like everybody. So they kind of ushered in this new wave of punk that was based more around like ethics and awareness, and it was like rooted in community and like grassroots activism. They promoted anti-racism and anti-sexism and like animal rights. And so like that was really inspiring to me, like seeing all these bands that were kind of using their creativity to like change something around them. And from like out of all the ideas I got from them, like these three ideas really kind of like stuck with me. So, you know, stand behind your beliefs, like regardless of what other people think, be authentic, just be like a good, honest person, and then have a strong work ethic. And like that's kind of, when I'm talking about the punk thing and like strong work ethic, it's like those bands weren't getting their music released on major labels, so they had to like learn how to press their own records and make their own artwork and book their own tours. So like all of these things really kind of stuck with me, and I think they affect like my everyday still. And then there's like skateboarding. You know, it creates this mental drive where you're like falling over and over and over, or like I fall all the time when I'm skateboarding, just to like land a trick. Like skateboarders sort of like visualize this end goal, and then they like repeat this action over and over and over till they get it, right? It's like similar to animation. But it kind of created this sense of like perseverance and like just putting in the hard work for me. And so like as a kid, like growing up, looking through these magazines, one thing I like noticed, like in both like punk and skateboarding, was that it was like accepting, and like it didn't seem too far away or like out of reach. So that was another really important thing for me as well, because it kind of made me realize like if I just put in the effort, like I can do it, and like these people are showing me that they're putting in the effort and they're doing it their own way, and like anything's kind of possible if you just kind of put your mind to it. So this sort of leads up to one of the first times I remember taking like a creative risk in my life. When I was 11, looking through a magazine, I saw an ad for a graphic artist position at one of the largest skateboard companies in the world at the time. I don't think it even occurred to me that like an 11-year-old can't have a job. And like because of how the culture was presented, like I thought I could actually get hired. And this is kind of what they were doing at the time. So like this is what I was up against at 11 years old. And like if you can imagine, like we didn't have internet at this time, no Instagram. Like so as a kid seeing these graphics, it was like so inspiring to me because you didn't see it anywhere else. But like skateboarding like brought visual communication into my life, I think. So probably should have stirred up some fear in me. Like their response could have just been like. They could have not responded for one, but even worse, they could have responded and told me like my work was really bad. But instead, they sent me this, and I can summarize this, but basically they sent me this letter and it says, thanks for responding to our ad for a graphic artist. We've been given an opportunity to see great work from hundreds of artists all over the world. Everyone who submitted artwork showed us great creativity and talent. The folks in our design group were amazed. However, all this high quality work has made our task of selecting the next artist extremely difficult, and unfortunately we can't offer you a position at this time. But don't get discouraged, keep a pencil in your hand, and keep your feet on a board. Like that was huge. That was like a huge moment for me. And they sent like a bunch of stickers, so like as a little kid, like this made me, you know, think first like, they weren't condescending, they weren't like giving me a pat on the head, being like, oh, that's so cute, kid, you said in this artwork. Instead, they actually made me feel like my art was legit and that I could actually have a job doing this someday. And for the record, this is what I sent. I mean, I don't know why I didn't get the job. And here's another one, like, here's a tip though, like, if you're sending an artwork to a brand, don't put other brand names all over it. And then this is like my personal favorite. I don't know, robot cops are always hassling us. So again, like failure is subjective. Like on one hand, I didn't get the job, but on the other hand, I learned that like people are pretty supportive if you just kind of like put in the effort and they see that. And this really just gave me so much confidence in my abilities and like just presenting my work. And it opened my eyes to the fact that you actually could have a job doing this stuff, which I think prior to that, like it didn't seem like real, but then I got that letter and I was like, oh, wow, I can have a job doing this. And so from that point on, I kind of knew I wanted a position in the creative field, like one day, whatever that was. So 10 years kind of following this time, I was just like immersed in skating and graphics and music, and I started getting interested in animation and film and editing, graphic design, but I didn't really know like where all that was going to take me. Eventually, I found my way to art school in Denver, where I'm from. Thanks. I wasn't exactly sure what program I was going to go into, but when I went to visit the admissions, I just had like drawings. It was like character drawings and a lot of that kind of stuff. So they suggested I go into this new program called Media Arts and Animation, which is essentially 3D animation and visual effects for film. And it's pretty early for 3D animation. Pixar had only released like Toy Story and Bug's Life at this point. So we weren't really seeing like a lot of design-driven like CG character stuff. Otherwise, it was mostly just like 3D and visual effects for live action. And motion design was not a thing at all yet. So kind of a rude awakening for me because coming from like this idea of like skateboard graphics and all this stuff, and then this is what I kind of get in school. And like for me, this was like doing math or something. Like it was much more technical than creative. Like I'm the type that I like to get in, I like to draw, I like to tweak, and even digitally, you know, like you can get in and make changes quickly, but with this, it was like, I couldn't see changes quickly. I was like typing in numbers and stuff to do things. This was like 3D Studio Max version 1. Yeah, it was kind of a nightmare. So, it wasn't all bad though. I did get a understanding of 3D, which is obviously important for where I am now. I learned kind of the basic software packages and Adobe and all that stuff. I did have design classes and life drawing classes, and like the best part was just meeting other creative people and kind of getting like that community. So yeah, when I graduated though, I just wasn't that interested in trying to pursue a career in like 3D and visual effects. So, and there weren't like opportunities in my city really anyway. I was still really like active in music and stuff and going to shows and being in bands. So at some point I decided I would maybe try to be a graphic designer in the music industry doing like album art and that kind of stuff. And so I made a move to try to get my foot in the door. There's a little record label in Denver. I knew some friends who worked there, so I was able to set up a meeting with the owner. And I took in like some mock-up artwork that I had done, like some fake album covers for some of their bands. And the meeting went really well. And at the end of it, he was like, "We'd love to have you come work with us, but we can't pay you." And so I was like, "All right, cool." It definitely didn't feel like success though. The situation does kind of look like failure. Like your parents don't want to know that you just graduated college and took a job for free, like in a dusty warehouse. But that's what I did, and like, but I knew in my heart like it was the right thing to do. Again, I was like visualizing where I wanted to be, and I was taking the actions now and putting in the work to do it. But it was really hard, especially not getting paid. So, you know, Monday through Friday, I was just like graphic designing my ass off, and then Saturday and Sunday, I was the world's best barista. And that was all the money I was making from the coffee. And so, but this like taught me a pretty like valuable lesson on like just work ethic. Like, excuse me, I knew I needed the experience, so I put in the effort to do it. But it ended up being awesome. Like I was designing constantly. I kind of like honed my skills in illustration and typography and layout. I learned like technical print production, like setting up files for die cuts and using spot varnishes and metallic inks. So it's definitely like worth it, even though I wasn't really getting paid money. I learned like so much there. And like the most valuable thing I learned was actually hearing direction or ideas from a band and then being able to translate those ideas into a visual concept. You know, that's obviously like a really important tool for all of us, but like specifically for me and what I'm doing now, like that's probably the first experience I kind of had with that. So I worked there for a while. I think they did eventually start paying me. But as we know, like the music industry changed really quickly with like iTunes and then streaming and then digital downloads and all that. I just realized the writing was on the wall that album design as a job in the future probably wasn't viable. But was all the effort I put into that like a waste of time? No, I don't think so. And actually, I was able to build my portfolio and build my network, and that ultimately led me to my next job, which was this place called Collective. So Collective was like a parent brand for like a handful of youth lifestyle and like skateboard, snowboard brands. And so the skills I learned at the record label actually translated pretty directly to what I was doing at Collective. Like the print production stuff that I learned doing like weird album packaging was now being applied to like product packaging and snowboard graphics. And it was actually like at this point, the motion design kind of came back into my life. So we started doing like editing and had to like add titles to things. And so I started using After Effects again. And so I kind of got some interest in that. And I think this is like around the time like studios started popping onto my radar too, like Shiloh and PsyOp and Imaginary Forces. And so that was pretty inspiring to finally see some animation, you know, from school. Now, like I'm seeing some animation where there's like design and typography kind of like integrated into it. Yeah. So I worked at Collective for a while, and then I started talking with two of my friends who I'd known years earlier at the record label. One was a web designer, and one was like a business grad who did like the label management. And so we're like, maybe we should start a studio. We have the perfect mix of people, so I could handle like the print and design and like whatever video stuff, and you could do the interactive website, and you're like the business guy. So it seemed like the right combination of skill sets. So we decided to do it, but we took like a good 6 months before actually quitting our jobs. And we just sort of like sat there planning like what the company was about, what the name was, what our logo would look like. Yeah, as far as I remember, we actually didn't have any clients or work lined up. So, you know, it made sense to quit our jobs, especially during the start of the 2008 global financial crisis. They were actually calling it this, though. So, yeah, this one seems like it could have been a disaster for sure, but as it turns out, there were actually a couple things that helped us kind of navigate through it. Like one, we stayed small. We had no overhead. We worked out of my basement for probably a year. We weren't paying rent. We didn't have employees. And so as 3 partners, any money we made just kind of went into our bank account so we could build up a nest egg. And then we didn't take out any business loans. Like we intentionally were like, let's not go into debt at all right now. Let's just, any money we make is gonna be profit. We weren't really paying ourselves that much. And for like the agencies and brands that had to kind of cut back on spending at that time, like we were actually a really good solution because with all of our sort of experience from our previous jobs, like we were actually able to do like pretty high quality work for, you know, a fraction of the cost of what they were paying with some of these like more established production companies at the time. Dogs. And don't burn bridges. I mean, I think that's obvious, but we all left our jobs on really good terms. Like, in fact, I left Collective and gave them 2 months notice. I stuck around to like interview people and help them fill my role after I was gone, because they were great people, and like, I didn't want to just like burn them and take off. And that ultimately was like a really big benefit for legwork, because it wasn't long until Collective started bringing us work, because they didn't do like motion or interactive stuff in-house. They were just kind of design in-house. So they started bringing us all that stuff. So like, they weren't huge budgets, but the creative opportunities were like really big. So like, we were able to put like, you know, cooler brands in our portfolio like right off the bat. So not only did we avoid going out of business in that first like year or so, we kind of excelled. We were just getting a lot of work because we made a good reputation of being able to like do high quality work for like lower cost. But then we started getting busier and busier, so we had to bring on some help. But kind of to maintain that sort of growth without having to spend a lot of money in the short term, instead of employees, we actually brought on more partners. But not just 1 or 2, we brought on 3 more, so 6 partners. We offered shares of the company to them as like an incentive to join, knowing that we'd kind of be working for scraps as we built up the company. And that became what I call the 6-partner model. I trademarked this, okay? So we're a company of all partners with no employees. Looking at it now, it seems like a bad idea, I guess. But it actually worked out really well for us for like a number of reasons. We all worked really well together. We had similar kind of like ideals and like personalities. We all came from like the skateboarding and punk background, so we all had that kind of mindset already. We had similar creative ambitions and work ethics. And we're all sort of like mid to senior level experience. So like as just 6 people, like we were pretty capable. And then also with 6 partners, like this was an important thing. Like everyone had a stake in the company. So I think that gave clients greater trust, because they knew if they were working with anybody in the company, they were an owner of the company, and they had more incentive to kind of like do a good job and make sure the project went smoothly. And I think for the time that made us like really unique. Yeah, so business plan. So similar to like the record labels that kind of inspired us, that were kind of like started as like a protest to major labels. That's kind of why we wanted to start the studio, sort of too. We wanted to do things our own way and kind of like not have the bad communication and some of the antiquated ways that like other studios that we had been at were kind of doing. But in terms of a business plan, we didn't really like think about what kind of work we wanted to be doing or like what the future actually looked like. We just like were excited about the challenge of kind of working together and like doing cool work. So instead of a business plan, we kind of used our values as like an internal compass to guide the company a bit. So like not afraid to fall and get back up, not concerned with the status quo, having fun was a priority, and do it all with integrity and a positive attitude. So, you know, all these things, again, are kind of like taken from skateboarding and punk. Like those are ideas that kind of come from that. And we use that to kind of like push the company forward. And also our collective skill sets came together to make a studio that was kind of unique for the time. I think we were one of the only studios, there were others, but there weren't many, that did interactive and motion design kind of like in one roof, or in-house. And these two things actually came together for us at the perfect time. So like the first iPhone had recently come out, and you know, obviously that was a game changer for the whole world, but like our industry in particular, you know, people had access to the internet constantly, and the way they use the internet changed. This is also a time when like Vimeo and YouTube were pushing to get like 1080p playback on the web, which is like also a big changer. Like suddenly you could just like be putting more video up. And overall, like the web technology was just changing really fast at this time, and that just meant more video content everywhere. So this time was like really crazy, 2011 to 2016. It really felt like everything we were doing was sort of like experimental. So whether that was like a new animation technique or like exploring like emerging technologies on the web, like every day was like really exciting. And I think the decisions that we had made up to this point probably could have backfired, but they ended up being things that really, I think, made us unique and like a stronger studio, in my opinion. So things were moving really fast. Everything was exciting, but it was also very exhausting. So something had to give. And so I guess like I knew we had the internal team to like do really good work, but we weren't quite getting the budgets that we needed. So I really like focused on trying to build the budgets, and you know, eventually we started getting more and more standalone animation work. So this was a really cool time. But then sort of like late 2018, a few things started happening, and we started considering closing the company. So one of our first employees, who had been with us for 9 years, decided to quit and go freelance. And then shortly after, another one put in their 2 weeks, and then another one requested the entire summer off. So that kind of left us with like a pretty slimmed down animation team at that time. And it felt like it was kind of a setback for like where I wanted to build the company. And then on top of that, we saw a trend of like clients starting to pay really late. I don't know what the deal was at this time, but and I'm not talking like 90, I'm not talking like net 90. I feel like I remember it being like 4 months and 6 months of like waiting for these big checks. And so like that sort of combined with everything else, it just kind of like, it was too much, honestly. And we were like, we just weren't having fun anymore. And so, you know, having fun was like kind of the main point of the company in the first place. Like if you're not having fun with the company, like to me, there is no point. I mean, yes, you want to make money, but that shouldn't be the main goal of, I think, anything that we do creatively, to be honest. So we made the choice to shut it down. And as hard as that was, we did it like the legwork ways, using those values I was talking about. This was we actually put this reel together after we had closed, like within the week after we closed. We called it our death reel. And then it was like just as much work as we could put in there from like over the time. And we also did a microsite that this kind of lived on, which you can still see. It's legworkstudio.com. And that microsite won an award. And so like if you look at our Twitter page, like the last tweet says, "We won an award for dying." And it was just like, that was just indicative of like who we were and how we like ran this company. So that was a fun way to close a company, I guess. So, you know, was it failure though? I don't know. I think some people might consider it failure, but like it's hard for me to consider that a failure because it was such a big part of my life. And within that 10 or so years, like I had so many successes within it. And I think even just running a company for 10 years is like a success. So I don't know, I'm cool with it. And also like in those last few years, I really like learned what I do want to be doing, like where I do want to go. And it definitely opened doors for me. Like I wouldn't be here if I hadn't had that company. So today, this is kind of like how I work. sort of two ways. Like I do design and art direction for studios, and then I also have a rep for direction work. And it's weird, I don't have the bubble of my own company anymore as like a safety net. And so like every day I'm facing like the fear of failure. But I realize like just push through it, and like it's always positive like on the other end. So as I wrap this up, I just want everybody to remember a few things. So say to yourself, what's the worst that can happen? Like, don't actually visualize the worst thing that can happen, but like, kind of like a shrug, right? So like, if you're fearing something, just be like, oh, what's the worst that can happen? That always helps me, I don't know why. Embrace failure and take risks, you know? Like, it's okay to fear failure, but like, don't let it stop you. If you don't take that risk, you're never gonna know what's on the other side. And then there's more than one path, and don't be discouraged. So in terms of like your career path, don't feel weird if it's not the same as somebody else's. Like mine was super windy, and it took me like a really long time to get here. But that's okay, I had like really good experiences within that time as well. And don't get discouraged if you don't like get the animation right away, or get the job that you were looking for. Like just keep trying and it'll happen. So that is all I have. Thanks.